Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Ulf Andreasson. I work for Sumo Logic here as a senior systems engineer in EMEA. I'm based in Sweden, and today I'm going to take you through a demo with regards to the application observability that we provide in Sumo or using the kind of Sumo service. So I'll give it another kind of 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds or so to get everyone getting online and getting joined in here with this. But yeah, as I also wrote in the chat here that basically I'm very pleased to have you here. Thanks a lot for taking the time out and actually look at this. There is a Q&A and there's a chat window here. So choose whichever you would want to use. I mean, I'm happy for both, and I do want to have your questions. I do want to have as interactive as we can do it, right? It's not necessarily that interactive, but at least kind of happy to kind of take any questions or so. Yeah, so I'm gonna use a couple of slides to begin with, just to set the scene and to kind of give it, overview of Sumo before we get going. And then I'm hoping to be able to kind of keep myself within 45 minutes, but it's I do have a tendency to speak a lot. So yeah, I mean, let's get going. I think, I see the number of joining people here is kind of is slowing down a bit, but yeah, there is going to be a recording as well. So you can always kind of watch it in the after this, right? So, but yeah, so application observability. Basically, I'm going to take you through what we've been doing in Sumo lately, as in this is probably what we've been doing for the last sort of year or 1.5 years or so. And there's constantly new things being added to it. We're not necessarily going to look at all the kind of beautiful things with regards to Kubernetes and global intelligence, but I want to spend some more time on run and some of the kind of tracing and spans and all that we can do in Sumo. But yeah, and basically observability is this kind of request for like being able to monitor your applications or your services from outside, so to speak, observing what's happening with the kind of information from the outside of it, right? So it's almost like looking at a car and kind of see what could potentially be happening with the engine, given that you get the exhaust and the sound and whatever you can see, right? But that said, there's different levels of information at different levels of activities or different kinds of activities. So if you're just going to monitor something, then you're pretty good with just having a lot of metrics. You can see sort of RPMs, or you can see whatever happens within the system, but it doesn't actually help you to diagnose something. If you are going to diagnose it, you need more information. And if you're really going to go down into the details of it, you really need to have kind of logs, traces, metrics, everything, right? If you want to troubleshoot and really find the root cause. So what we are saying in Sumo is that basically, depending on what you want to do, or depending on who you are as a person are, or what role you have, there's different levels of information you need. And when I say information, I typically mean machine data. So we cannot label logs, metrics, and traces and events. That's typically what we call machine data. But so it all depends on how deep down you need to go and all that. But also to that extent, so when it comes to logs, for example, with Sumo, you don't pay equally much for every log. I mean, you can basically say like, these are logs that I need for real time. These are logs that I only need for kind of certain occasions, or maybe 1 month or something like that. So you would effectively pay differently depending on what type of logs you bring in. And you are in full control of what type of log, how much you want to pay for it. You could even say like, I only wanted a small piece of that log. I don't need the whole log line or anything like that. I just need sort of a couple of words or effectively some metrics or something like that, right? So there's a lot of flexibility there. But yeah, so it all depends on what you want to do and what you need to do rather. Again, sort of just schematics, collecting data with Sumo is pretty easy. We're fully behind the open source technologies out there, right? And there's lots of them. So open telemetry, telegraph, fluentd, fluentbit, Prometheus, all of those things are, interchangeably with Sumo in the sense of like you can use those. We are effectively only looking for receiving data from your environment, whether it's in the cloud. And if it is in the cloud, we use something called hosted collectors, which basically is an HTTPS endpoint, and we push the data into Sumo. We can actually use APIs to go and pull data from different cloud services because these are equally important as your kind of applications running within the cloud. But likewise, 40% of all the data in Sumo, or probably somewhere around sort of 30 to 50%, is actually coming from on-prem systems. So we do have sort of what we call installed collectors, which are basically collecting the information you want them to collect and push that into Sumo as well, right? And this is in a full secure model of doing a kind of a lot of capabilities there with managing those and making it really simple and also very specific to what data you want to collect. And all this with regards to the data tier. So if you're going to have sort of continuous, frequent or infrequent data, which basically means, how much do you want to pay for it? That's kind of the end result of it, right? And there are some different kind of capabilities with the data depending on the tier, but that's kind of pretty given as well, I guess. So, really able to kind of collect pretty much any data. And essentially, we don't need to parse the data. We don't need to kind of prepare the data to get it into Sumo. As long as it's text data, you can just push it into Sumo. We get customers pushing weather data or IoT data together with their applications so that they can correlate the different data sources coming into Sumo and really see like, okay, is the weather affecting whatever application I'm having or something like that. Perfectly fine to do that, right? So just basically any text-based data. With regards to the parsing, you can do it when you ingest it. And that's typically what you do after some time when you know that this data is useful. I'm going to do this all the time. I'm going to have sort of scheduled searches or views being created continuously of these. Then you can sort of do that. But you can also say like, just dump in the data to Sumo. I'm going to parse the data when I actually run the search query, because then I'm very flexible. I don't need to kind of do a lot of upfront work. I just basically push the data into Sumo. I can then look at it. So when I'm doing my search, I can investigate what fields or what sort of data points I want to use and, pass the data that I need for at the point of time in search. So it really is kind of easy to, try out some new things, and then you can decide what you want to do with it or something like that. Anyways, observability. So basically, we have sort of a user interface that's really catered for it, trying to cater for when you get thousands of components and really kind of complex environments and stuff like that, right? Microservices, containers, even when you start looking at a lot of VMwares or whatever it may be, right? When you have lots of different components with different hierarchies and all that, you need to have a simple way to visualize that. Now, once you start to look at it, you of course need to get, as much as you need to have like a holistic view of it, you need to be able to drill down into the dependencies and into the details of it. You need to be able to correlate the data sources and all those kind of things. We also try to do as much as possible out of the box. So anomaly detection, if we can look at a metric, we can see how it behaves over a couple of days, then we should be able to give you an indicator if there's an anomaly with regards to that metric. So we do those kind of things out of the box. You don't need to kind of set that up yourself. You can do, if you got specific things you're looking for, you can do that too. But we also do things like this out of the box. And there's a lot of other machine learning capabilities that is kind of part of our applied analytics in there. Now, the last thing we have, given that we have a lot of customers and we can anonymize all the data, we can actually give you like benchmarks. So when you get something, you look at something, it's number 42. The question you would ask yourself, is that good or bad? 42, is that high or low? What is it? You can then benchmark yourself against what we see other customers and users of Sumo. Completely anonymous. So you can't sort of benchmark yourself against your competitors or something like that. But you can at least see if that number is high or low compared to others. Are you getting attacked? Is that a high, low number? Do you have a lot of penetration tests or whatever it may be? That will give you an indicator. But we can also give you a capability to help you optimize. Are you kind of configured as many others are, or as maybe AWS can recommend you to configure? So that can also be used for that kind of information there. So a lot of capabilities. We won't look too much into that today. But yeah, so let's look at the demo. And basically, before we jump into the Sumo portal, I'm going to show you, we got this coffee bar application. It's really kind of, a nice way to order some coffee. No, I'm just kidding. But basically, let's say I want to have an espresso and a cappuccino, and of course, I want to have some tiramisu. So I order those three things, and I kind of check it out. And basically, I get a bill to pay, which is like $7, and I'm going to pay $10. And we'll see if I use this, right? But basically, I get a trace ID here. So this basically, this is a running application within Sumo. It just basically takes an order, kind of goes to a coffee machine, tries to kind of create the coffee and get the sweets and all that, right? So in Sumo, you would look at this and you would have a Kubernetes cluster, of course, because that's what we're using, and not sure why this one, but yeah, here's my coffee bar application that runs within Sumo. So I'm looking at this from a Kubernetes perspective, and that's more like from a resource perspective. So we haven't yet drilled into the application, right? But I can see my CPU utilization is pretty average, or actually quite low. My memory is average, and my disk space is low, and you get the metrics here. I can even see like if there's any error messages being generated here. So, yes, with regards to the coffee bar namespace, there's a couple of error messages. There's also some error messages with regards to dashboards and kube systems. But basically, and in addition to that, I can also see sort of some security rules being triggered, because when we deploy this collection, and we do use kind of Fluentd, FluentBit, Prometheus, but we also use Falco. And Falco is one of those kind of solutions for Kubernetes where it will basically have a lot of rules for all the different components in the Kubernetes cluster. And those rules will be triggered depending on what you do or what you kind of see. And these kind of will be added here as well, right? So I can look at this and I can drill straight into it. I can just go straight to all the logs or all the error logs or whatever it may be, right? I may have some other dashboards and things. Didn't have much for this because we just mainly looking at the log messages. But if I look at a pod, it would look slightly different. So I get some, I can go to that pod or I can look at other dashboards that we recommend you to take a look at. And there's a lot of information here, so I can kind of really see where this pod is and how it relates to everything, and really the whole sort of hierarchy, right? Now, that's not, this is just one dashboard, and I can have multiple others. So if I am interested in the security, I can look at that. If I am interested in, I maybe kind of use Agba security, or I'm running this cluster in EKS, as in the AWS service for Kubernetes, which I actually do in this case. But there's a lot of different things, right? And you can add any of your kind of personal dashboards or customized dashboards to this as well. So there's a lot of capabilities in kind of adding more data to this, maybe some application data or some sort of, some overview data, whatever it may be, right? But when I look at this, so I haven't even got started. I'm just looking at this from a cluster level. And as you know, in a Kubernetes cluster, you have a lot of, kube system stuff and things like that. You have the Sumo collection running there, but you of course have the namespace with regards to the application. Now, when I start to look at that namespace, that's actually when we can see the, the different sort of log messages, error by container, error by, whatever it is. I can see pod starts, restarts, and all those kind of things, right? And there's a lot of information just drilling down or going down this page, right? I have anything from CPU limits by pod to, all the resource requests or limits and file systems being used by this namespace. So it just gives me a lot more details there. And it doesn't stop there, right? Because I look at this namespace, I can also see all the different deployments here. If I want to go into one of these deployments, like the machine service, I can do that. And I'm going to get the information with regards to that deployment from a resource perspective. So this is not brilliant if you're a developer. You probably couldn't care less. But what you would do is that, you would just see like, okay, everything seems to be fine with regards to that machine service. Now, what you would do as a developer, you would actually use the same Explorer, but you would go and look at this from an application service point of view. That's where we actually start to look at the microservices of the applications within the kind of Kubernetes cluster. And again, I'm not interested in the default application or the default namespace where there may be some running applications. I'm focused on my coffee bar application, right? And now I can see the different microservices being based on this. And the beauty here is that with regard to the application, I can see the latency for the application and the different components. And if there's any component that has a higher latency than any of the other ones, the number of requests or the number of error percent. So I can kind of really see this. And again, anything I want to look at in more detail, I can just click on and I get this kind of entity browser on the right-hand side. Now, I can also see this kind of in more details of like the numbers or something like that, because this may not always be easy to kind of understand, to see, right? But here I got the numbers of it. So there is a lot of latency in the coffee bar, as well as the kind of, this is actually my browser that I use to connect to it, right? That said, I can also see the application architecture here as in the service map. I can, of course, break this out and look at the proper service map, but this basically just kind of makes it possible to put that in a dashboard, so you can easily see that. Now, when I look at the latency of it, you see that here as well, right? And you can see the number of requests, the type of request, basically all the different microservices here, and likewise with errors. So with any of these things, you can kind of just drill into this, right? So you can actually go to the details of it. And again, just click on something and that will take you further. Now, before we kind of go too deep, or actually maybe we should. So so let me go, let me take this one here, right? I want to look at this one. I could then just say like, okay, I want to open up the coffee bar machine and I want to see that as in the entity board. I can see that there's been some elevated latency here, right? And I can kind of see this here as well. Or actually, let me go to the proper kind of service map. So again, here I can kind of just select the service map or the application I want to have. You can, of course, kind of expand on this. And a couple of things here. I mean, this is quite simplistic. This is completely automated as well. There's nothing you have to do to get this view, or yes, you need to collect the data from the Kubernetes cluster and you need to collect sort of the tracing data as well. But that's kind of, just basically run the collection and you're going to collect everything you need. Then this will automatically pop up. And as you can see here, we actually, we will just bring in anything. So there is actually a banking application here as well, that runs here. But when we look at the coffee bar application, we can kind of see the specifics for that. Now, my browser is actually this one. Now, I do have a Postgres database here as well. This is not being instrumented by Sumo. So that's why you have this kind of cloud symbol here to just say like, okay, we understand that it's there. There's some kind of service there and its name is Postgres. But we don't really understand what happens within that. We can see the connections over to the cache desk service, but that's it, right? Now, we also have the kind of suites function, which basically is being used when I kind of order my suites, right? So these two functions have not really been sort of connected with this in any network shape or any kind of calls or anything like that, but these are still there, and these seems to be kind of part of the application. What I also can see is that the size of the circus basically tells me the number of requests. So how many requests I have per second, it's going to kind of give me size of this. And also the color coding is basically what's happening here. So I do have some anomalies here that's happening. Now, this could be, and this right now, it's just automatically being kind of detected, and it's being detected with the focus on latency. If I change this to arrows, that would just kind of, try to identify any latency with regards to arrows. But you could also have a manual detection of this. So say, for example, you don't want to have this automatic detection, but just being alerted when there's kind of something happens, whatever number of latency greater than, or the latency greater than some kind of milliseconds here for the last kind of 15 minutes, something like that, right? Sorry, I need to click on that one as well. But then, yeah, so you can kind of really influence this of when do you want to see this if you're not happy with our automatic detection of it, right? So that would help you sort of understand. Now, if we look at, say, the machine service, I can, I come in here, I see something that kind of catches my eye, right? And now what I can do is I can go from this and I can pivot into anything. We've already spoken about logs, and of course metrics would be the same thing. But probably most interesting from a microservice type application is to actually go into the traces. So looking at this machine service, I get all the traces that are happening here. Some of them has very high duration, 741 milliseconds, right? Actually, most of them are quite high. But I can also see sort of a brief overview of those kind of spans within the traces. Now, what I'm probably interested in something that kind of fails or, so where I have issues. So if I say like, I want to see spans which have a higher a number of arrows over kind of zero. So I'm effectively only seeing sort of spans that has, or traces that has some arrows within them. Now, I'm really gonna kind of just take one of these and look at it, right? This basically shows me, first of all, I have my browser. So my click in the browser, or effectively my sort of real user monitoring, or kind of really instrumenting my website and the JavaScript there. Now, once I've kind of come further, I'm actually getting connected to the application, which basically is what happens in the back end, so to speak, which is the application that I've developed. Now, you can see that there's a number of different services here. And some of these services actually, it indicates an error. And I can kind of more easily see this if I hide the kind of colors and I want to kind of highlight the spans, arrow spans. And now just using the mouse, I can expand on this as well, right? So I can kind of really get into the details of this. And just like I see here that the get beans service is kind of the lowest span, so to speak, which are failing. And, so I have some sort of data here as in metadata, but if I click on the metadata label, I will see a lot more, right? So this is a Ruby application, collected the data using OpenTelemetry, got the versions and everything, and basically is kind of 502 in the status of it, right? And then it runs here within this Kubernetes cluster, and we have some data from a Sumo perspective. And I can also pivot in to actually look at that sort of specific service and kind of if I want to do something more there, right? But what I probably want to do in this case is not necessarily to kind of drill. I mean, I do want to drill deeper into it, but because we collect all this information, we collect the traces, we collect the metrics, we collect the logs, I could just pivot into the logs of this span. I could sort of pivot into the logs of the whole trace, but that would be all of these things and probably a lot of information which I don't need. But this one, which are failing here, and think of it like this is just microservice that lived for a couple of seconds maybe and did what it was supposed to do and basically shut down. All that has generated is kind of collected in Sumo automatically. We store it for whatever retention you want to have it stored for. And we also tag the logs with the span and trace ID, which really makes it so easy to pivot from one thing to another, to pivot from a span into the logs. And just clicking on this, I can see that this one has failed. It's an error message here. And basically it says that it doesn't have enough coffee grains in the machine. So therefore, this hasn't been able to kind of produce my coffee. And basically it does have two lines, but yeah, they do happen on the same time. And, I mean, basically, again, this is another feature of Sumo. Given that this comes from sort of a Kubernetes cluster, it's all JSON logs and it's been sent out to standard out. And we kind of parse that automatically. So we have all the fields here, basically, that was used in that JSON, right? But the main point here is that I can easily pivot from the trace into that exact log of that trace. So, I mean, this is one of the beautiful things with Sumo. And you can really, I mean, it's not like you're going to have sort of two different tools where tracing is in one tool and logs are in the other one or anything like that. You can just basically move around in the same sort of user interface, in the same kind of effectively environment and kind of see all that information. Now, if I want to expand on this, I can always kind of use this span ID and I can start to run another search or I can start to do other things in there. Make sense? And yeah, sorry, I should have asked a lot of questions up, at least now that you're live, but yeah. Anyways, it's always hard with the kind of interactivity on a webinar. So, so that's kind of one thing of it, right? Now, what I also wanted to show you is something sort of in addition to this, because what we've been looking at so far is effectively the back end of it, right? What we can look at as well is, of course, the front end. So when we look at the coffee bar application, I can see that I do have a front end, which basically is the kind of front end that's going to give me information about the application. Now, if I start to look at that front end, I can actually start to see, what is happening in the browser. This is just a basic information here. I can see, pretty much the same as I saw before, but with a bit of focus on the front end. But when I go into my browser, which basically is kind of the coffee bar application you saw here, right? This is just a simple sort of HTML page with some JavaScript on. In Sumo, though, we would collect that. We would instrument that application, or as in the JavaScript and the HTML. And you would actually see the kind of page load, the latest request for it, what kind of browser am I using here? Is there any differences with regards to the browsers? Is there any differences with regards to the operating systems being used? And or sort of any geolocation or anything like that, right? Now, you can also start to look at this from a website performance, right? So you can kind of see the general website performance. So anything from DNS lookups to like time to interactive and time to page load and all that, right? And you can see the specifics of the kind of first content paint and stuff like that, as well as the number of requests over time from this specific interaction here, right? Now, when I can, as I did before, I can always drill into any of these ones and I can just kind of click on a hair, right? I can also see, so, you get the information here, but I can also pivot into the traces of these ones as well. And one of the things, so this is going to be very kind of specific to the front end. And we probably, I haven't sort of looked at all these ones, to be honest, so I'm out on a limb here. But basically what you see here is some additional functionality as well. Because basically here's kind of the front end. So basically all of the things that happens on the in the browser. There's a lot of resource fetching and document fetching and loads and stuff like that, right? But what you can see here as well is actually something we call trace events. So because what we see happening is that you can actually put a lot of information into the trace events or into the traces, which are going to be picked up as a trace event here. And that way you can get much more kind of understanding of what's happening, and these events are actually showing up. So, effectively what you saw in the kind of previous graph is now coming up as events, which could be of interest to kind of look at more, right? So that's one other way to kind of look at this. And there's a lot of different events here taking place, right? But we sort of highlight the first content paint and the document load, or content load, sorry. So yeah, there's kind of those things as well, but this just basically gives you a very kind of good view of what happens from a front-end perspective on your site, right? So not just looking at the back end and the applications there, but also being able to look at the front end. And you can influence and kind of, all of these dashboards that you see, you can change those, or you can kind of customize those to whatever you would want to have, or you could just copy it to kind of something that would be more specific to what you're looking for, if there's anything specific there. Yeah, there's a question here, but I'll take that in a couple of minutes. So yeah, so that's also kind of one thing there. Now, so yes, one more thing, right? We kind of used to being able to look at logs and be able to search in logs and kind of query logs in many different ways, right? Now, when you start to use microservices-based application, you're still going to have the logs and everything, but the traces are going to be more important. There's no questions about that, because you need to understand how these kind of applications really connect to each other, so you can kind of see the service maps and all that, right? And the more information you actually put into the spans or traces, which basically is up to the developer, right? The more information the spans are actually getting quite interesting. I kind of very simplistically, but I tend to look at a span almost as a log line. So what you can do with spans in Sumo is that you can actually search them. You can search them like a log line. And we kind of try to make it a bit simpler in that sense. But yeah, if you say like, okay, I want to look at all the spans, what we've done so far is kind of looking at a service map and go top down. We look at an application or a service map, we kind of drill down into it. What I want to be able to do is actually bottom up. So I want to look at all the different spans. And let's say I want to look at all the different spans that is equal to, let's say I should have, the cache desk. So I'm going to search at all the spans that has anything to do with cache desk. I'm going to look at the duration of it, and I'm going to have the kind of average of those kind of spans. Then I want to look at, first of all, the timings. I want to time slice this in 1 minute, like you would do with any log. And then I want to look at the status code of this. Group them by status code effectively. And I'm going to do this for the last 15 minutes, right? So I'm effectively running a search. And here I have sort of, a bar chart or a chart based on status code. And as I said, I'll put it into a column chart. So I can see my 200s, my 402s, and my 500s, right? And I got a lot of 500s here. So the question is, why do I have that? And that would actually be quite nice to put on a sort of dashboard, or, you know, you do have the raw messages and you do have the information here as well, right? So I always have that. In this case, I obviously don't really have much because, first of all, I'm just looking at the duration. But I mean, if I had any valuable information in the kind of spans, that could be something I could look for as well, right? So now I could just kind of easily put this into a dashboard or something like that. Or I can even do some further kind of investigations here. So I can convert this into a log search, which basically just going to use a kind of trace spans here. And then I, you know, may use some start and stop time, and making sure I'm using lowercase. And then basically I'm looking at status code where the kind of service is cache disk. I time slice this and I look at the average duration by time slice. And that's pretty much, I mean, we've done this plenty of times, but we typically do it with logs. The beauty is I can do it with traces as well, or sorry, spans. So that gives me a very flexible way of kind of looking at this as I was looking at logs, and being able to correlate this with maybe some logs or with some other data. So, you know, if I may want to enhance this question further, include some other data, and sort of try to do some smart sort of correlation between these. This is just in the beginnings of it, but basically we give you this capability, and that really could be quite useful when you start to look at sort of microservices-based architecture and applications. Now, of course, the last thing I want to touch on here, because we have touched on quite a few things, and this is not going to work now, but if I wanted to be notified, as in I want to create a monitor, so if there's anything that I want to see in here, and, you know, I want to be highlighted or alerted by this if it reaches, you know, if the kind of 500 is more than 80 error message, or if I get sort of more than 80 500s in here for the last 15 minutes, I want to sort of add that to an alert. I want to create an alert of that. Now, yeah, sorry, it is not going to work, but let me go down here to monitoring, because that's the other thing, right? Within the monitors, we can actually, and let me see, where's it here? When you start to use Sumo, and when you kind of start to use something like Kubernetes or AWS or whatever it may be, right? Apache, Nginx, you're going to get a lot of monitors already sort of out of the box. These monitors are basically just like going to highlight you and alert you if there's anything down. So, for example, the simple one of like a kubelet has gone down, then we're going to alert you. And, you know, you could just, what you basically have here is that in this case, this is a monitor based on metrics. And it's just going to look at like the metrics up for a job that is a kubelet. And it would just kind of look at that. And if that's less or equal to 0 within the last 15 or 5 minutes or whatever it may be, then it's going to alert you. Now, you could say like, okay, you can tolerate something like a less than 1 or is equal, yeah, less or equal to 1 or something like that. So you can always change these, right? That's just going to kind of change like where your limit is, so to speak, or and this is a static one. But of course, if you want to use an outlier, effectively automatically define like, okay, 1 deviation from this, that's when I want to see it, right? That could be done as well. So that would just change this to say like, okay, what kind of direction do you want to see this in? You know, when do you want to be highlighted? So once you've decided what it is you want to be notified about, you then say like, how do you want to be notified? Do you want to put it in a Slack channel? Do you want to kind of send an email? Do you want to, you know, interface with PagerDuty or something like that? You can easily do that too, right? Now, and that's pretty much what it is. And you can, of course, I mean, if it's a webhook or something like that, you can, you know, alter your payload to be whatever you want it to be, right? And that will give you the kind of nice way of being able to sort of be alerted if there's anything happening in your environment. And of course, you know, if you're kind of an application developer, you're going to be specific to the applications you have or something like that. Now, once you get alerted, we have this alert response page, which basically says like, okay, right now I have, what is it, 2, 4, 6, 7 active alerts. One is a warning, the other one's a critical. And if I take the malicious threat actor, yeah, let's say like a ALB 500 spikes alert. So I'm seeing a lot of alerts with regards to 500s in my ALB here, right? I will then see the kind of, okay, the metric that triggered this alert, the query that really generated it, and I can pivot into the metrics explorer here and start to kind of look around and do some more investigation. But we've kind of identified this happening here, right? I'm getting the time series data that really instigated this, and I'm also, right now, it's actually not for this one, but we're trying to give you more context with regards to this alert. Because this is a metrics one, it isn't that much I can do, but if it was a log-based one, I would actually have a lot of logs and other things that I could potentially provide with more context. I'm also going to see related alerts within the last 30 minutes. Now, that's from a timing perspective. What I could say is that I want to see related alerts with regards to the entities. Or I could look at the monitor itself. So basically, this monitor, how often does it fire? You know, does this indicate that maybe this isn't that great monitor in the sense of like it's firing too often, or I could do some sort of customizations or optimizations to it, so it doesn't, you know, it really fires. It doesn't give me any false alarms and things like that. Now, the other thing you can do is, of course, you can kind of write some playbook material. You can, you know, open this as a monitor, you can resolve it or whatever it is you want to do, right? And as I said previously, you would, of course, also be able to kind of send this information into, say, for example, PagerDuty or ServiceNow or something like that. So that's absolutely possible to do. So that is probably as much as I had to say. And I know this was a lot to kind of cater for, right? There's, I mean, we looked at the Kubernetes from a sort of infrastructure point of view. We delved into the application. We were able to look at the service map and kind of move or pivot into the kind of traces from there. And then we could go into logs and actually see some of the problems. We could then also take a look at the at the front end, so the website or the JavaScript code and stuff like that. And then we could effectively sort of, instead of looking top down, we could go bottom up and look at the kind of spans and effectively sort of do like a bottom up analysis and create sort of monitors which effectively would going to generate me alerts and kind of be able to look at those as well, right? So there's been a lot of things here. So what I mean, that is as much as I was kind of thinking about. Yeah, I didn't do all of this, or I actually did a lot more. So I got some time for kind of questions. So there is one question here, and please, if you do have any questions, then let me know in the Q&A or chat window or something like that. But there is, okay, so someone looked at the CC webinar we had yesterday. So CC is our Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So sorry, to detect customer security events, to monitor applications. Okay, yeah. So correct. So the question is really like, when do you use CIP and when do you use CSE? Right. And you know, the point here is that CSE is kind of our Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So that's kind of wholly focused on really identify security incidents. And that is, you come to it, having Sumo, you come to it using this. It does have a different user interface, but it's all focused on identifying security incidents. Basically, someone's trying to get in there, someone's trying to kind of really, as in this one, credential access and execution. So someone's been able to log on to a system, or using a username or something like that, and being able to execute something. There's a lot of different, all of this is kind of based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so you can easily sort of look at all the different events happening here, right? But this is all about security, trying to understand who's getting in, who's actually been violating things, what could this potential attacker or bad person be doing, right? The core of Sumo is actually more about operations. So we cannot talk about observability in this case. And yes, I mean, there is a lot of security in here, right? So you can go in here, you can look at the security overview of rules being triggered within Kubernetes. That will give you, I mean, think of it like this. What you do here is searching for different things. It's kind of a manual way to identify a security incident or something like this. While what you do in CC is that you generate rules and different sort of ways to automatically identify what's happening. So that's very different. And typically it's a kind of very different, audience for that, as in you're going to have these secure SOC analysts or the Security Operations Center analyst people looking at this, while here's more the DevOps or the operational people looking at this, right? So it is kind of very different in the sense of who's doing what. So there's another question here. We are trying not to use monitors for normal logs, to use them on metrics, migrating all the checks on scheduled queries. Is there a good or wrong way? So there's actually, I mean, monitors, think of it like this. We actually started with scheduled searches, so scheduled queries. So a scheduled query is that you basically generate a query. Let's say you do something like, this is not a brilliant one. So impossible login speeds is probably better. So you would effectively just see like, okay, if you have a user who's trying to log on to the system from two different places. So this guy here, Vonnie, he's trying to log on from Sweden and the US pretty much within a 10-minute window. Then the distance between these two places is quite far apart, right? So you wouldn't be able to do that, at least not sort of manually or kind of physically, I would say. But yeah, I mean, maybe he's using some VPN or something, but you may want to be aware of that. So what you can do with this search is that you can identify that this is happening. Now, what I may want to do here is to say, okay, actually, I want to save this search. And I don't just want to save it. I want to create a scheduled search. And I then want to run this in real time or every 15 minutes, whatever, right? So you can do that. And you can say, like, if I'm getting a match on this, then I actually want to be notified using email or Slack or whatever it may be, right? It's not actually a bad thing to do. I mean, there are some capabilities, as in you can get some more contextual data when you run a scheduled search compared to when you run a monitor. I would just say, like, if if it is, it depends on, really, and I hate to say that, but it does depend on which way you want to do, right? Sometimes monitors may be better. Sometimes scheduled searches may be better. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we probably put most focus on monitors today, but that's also because kind of scheduled searches, we can do quite a lot of things that we want to do with them. So I mean, these been around for over 5 years now, right? So while monitors is something that we've kind of come up with for the last 1 year or so. So there's probably more potential or potential for improvement with regards to monitors compared to scheduled searches. We don't really see that many sort of requests for enhancements with regards to scheduled searches and so on. But use whichever of those that makes sense. There's no kind of wrong or right or wrong or anything like that. So that's perfectly fine. Yeah, and that if you guys don't have any more questions, I see that I've been running over for kind of 4 minutes, something like that. But yeah, if you if you don't have any more questions, please, if you haven't started using Sumo already, you can always go to our website and just start a trial. We just need your kind of email address and where you want to run the instance in. There's a lot of different events taking place. So sumologic.com/events if you want to see those. And basically reach out to any of my colleagues or myself. My name is my email is pretty easy in the way that it's ulf@sumologic.com. And yeah, thanks for spending the time with me on this call today. And as I said, if there's anything, just let us know. We're here to help. So thanks a lot and have a good day, guys.